Hello everyone, I hope everyone's doing well. I wanted to do a little reading video just because I haven't done one in a while, and May has been a huge reading month for me. I read 12 books in the month of May, just about. I've got them all here. Yeah, that is a lot of books. It's been insane. I have been able to read quite a lot. Luckily my job is seasonal, so a lot of like time at work during an off season is spent reading. I also am just a very fast reader, so that does help obviously. But yeah, I'll start from the first one that I finished this May, which is Flowers of Evil by Charles Baudelaire. It's really such a beautiful collection of poetry. It is translated from French, and obviously I think poetry is the form of literature in which like the most is lost during translation. A lot of poetry just depends on like the specifics of the language, so like intonation, flow, things like that. So I still really enjoyed these poems. So this poetry is full of celestial imagery. That's the thing that stood out to me the most in this book, was the sheer amount of reference to the moon and celestial bodies like stars, and the way that they're portrayed in this book. They almost like become characters, and a lot of the time the speaker could even be interpreted as a like celestial form themselves. And also he writes a lot of like sensual poetry, and often like death and sensuality are very linked, which I also found interesting. In the end, I interpreted it as all being about man's relationship with nature. So there's like the overarching celestial body, there's like a feeling of the sublime that you might feel of like feeling small when you look at the moon or the stars, or just like think about the sheer like scale of the world. And then in contrast to that, there's death and sex, which are the two most like base natural things that a human can do, I think. There's a lot of literature that links the two together, not necessarily in a necrophilic way, but I think that Baudelaire's poetry definitely leans on necrophilia in a lot of poems. Generally, I just found it to be a kind of meditation on the fragility of human existence, combined with this like these sublime feelings that we are allowed to feel, and that can often like overwhelm us, especially in comparison to like our biological reality as animals. I just found it an insanely beautiful collection of poems. I really recommend to anyone who's interested. I think that this translation was really good. Obviously I don't have anything to compare it to, but I do like that I kept the rhyme. The next book I got through was Eugene, Onegin by Pushkin, which is a novel that I've always wanted to read. I've never read anything by Pushkin before, and I think this was just beautiful. Again, it's kind of similar to the first book I read in the sense that it is a translated work of poetry. This is translated from Russian. Obviously Pushkin is very well known in Russia, and a lot more well known in Russia than I think he is in like England. Really enjoyed this. I found it so like full and like alive. Like it felt so like human. It's a book about like yearning and jealousy and lust and like quickly changing human emotions, and it just gives it such a beautiful like dimension. I also know that some of this book was like lost / missing, which does kind of come through towards the end, like after the part that was supposed to be missing, because there is a sort of jump. But like with that knowledge, then you can kind of get through it quite well. I do think that it wouldn't hold up very well from a feminist perspective, because of the way that like women are romanticized and almost made like mythical creatures, and then like discarded and picked back up again at the will of the protagonists. So I will say that, but overall like amazing. Definitely pick it up if you can. The next book I finished, slightly more modern than the others, but honestly I have to admit that this book just fell a little short to me for the majority of the book. I thought that the end was the bit that really stood out to me, that kind of made it worth the read. But other than that, I don't know, I just didn't feel like the best. It's essentially a book about this woman and this old like housekeeper she has, who's almost kind of a mythical creature. She is characterized as very strange, but also like very motherly. She's kind of like just out of the frame but will always like dip back in. Like the whole of the book is just kind of about this relationship that they have and like the things she discovers about this housekeeper as the book goes on. The main issue I had with this book was the characterization of this like mysterious woman, because to me it was just very inconsistent. Like she had this very mysterious demeanor for the majority of the book, but then there'd just be this random like intense torrent of detail at like spontaneous places, and it just felt very strange and like jarring to read. And it honestly felt like she was more of a plot tool than a character. And also the way that she jumped around like tenses. So she's writing like from the future back on her past, and then she'll like potentially include specific like references to things that she knows now while she's writing about the past. And it just kind of disrupted the flow of the story. But anyway, I did really appreciate the ambition in this book, and the like raw emotion, particularly towards the end. I thought it was extremely like well written at the end, but it just didn't like completely hit the mark for me, which is fine. But yeah, still a good read overall, I'd say. Next we have a very famous book, which is Dead Souls by Gogol, and I've been meaning to read this for the longest time because it is so famous, and it's just incredible. Like I really enjoyed it. The way that metaphors were used, like specifically to describe nature in this book, really stood out to me. The way that characters were like formed and described was so like specific and almost like comical. This is what I gathered from the novel. I don't know anything about the actual structure of Russian society at that time, but it seems like there are like landowners who will own portions of land to farm, and then they'll have like a specific number of serfs who will do like manual labor for them, farm the land. And this guy goes around and he's like a very likable guy. Like he's very he comes across like as very personable, but then he asks every landowner he can find if he can buy like the dead serfs off of them, because I gather that this is how it works. They have like a list of serfs, and they have to pay taxes on every serf until like they can redo the census. And like, so if any serfs have died between the time of their old census and the new census, then they'll still be paying taxes on those. So this guy like goes around and he's asks these people if he could buy their dead serfs off of them, even though technically they're still alive because they haven't been taken off a census. They are dead, so he's essentially like paying money in order to pay taxes on like dead people who just don't exist. And it's just like such a like wonderful book. Like it's so funny at times. I found the end kind of confusing, to be honest, but I guess that this guy just always gets away with everything. Like he's just immortal. Yeah, I just love the way that Russian writers like put things across, and I found it so like alive and intense. Alive is a word I use a lot when I'm describing like books written by Russian authors. Incredible. Really recommend this. Okay, the next book I read is very short. It's Pnin by Vladimir Nabokov. This is also a reread. I don't really know why I reread this. I just didn't really like remember what went on. I just randomly saw it on my bookshelf and I was like, okay, I'll pick it up again. Especially because I was very disappointed by Ada or Ada, which is another Vladimir Nabokov novel I recently read. I did not like it at all. I found it so bad. And Pnin, it was kind of like a little bit refreshing, you know, reminding me why I actually enjoy Nabokov. So I would characterize this book as an academic satire, which seems to be like a common theme in his books, I guess. You could also say that Pale Fire is kind of a satire of academia and universities and professors, everything like that. Just it doesn't have as much like overall complexity, so I would say it's a pretty good like first novel to read if you're just getting into Nabokov. There's a lot of like very specific things that Nabokov like usually includes in his novel. So a lot of his novels also like are kind of satirical takes on psychoanalysis. So he has a lot of like jokes and like asides about like Freud and psychology and like modern psychoanalysis, and how he just like doesn't believe it, he thinks it's all garbage, which is quite entertaining to read. He was also very interested in ornithology, which is the study of like butterflies and collecting butterflies. So you also still have like lots of bugs and butterflies in this book. I also like loved how things were described as Pninian. The main character being Pnin. I don't know why, I just love that, like something is Pninian. Like he would say, oh, he had a very Pninian luggage. He had like an apple and his reading glass, and that's so Pninian. And I was like, I would love to do that with myself. Like I would love to say like, oh, I packed a very Amian bag. Like, I don't know. Anyway, I did really enjoy this little book. I think it was worth the reread. I probably won't read it again in the near future. I don't really have anything else to gain from it, but definitely good as an introduction into Nabokov if you're interested. The next book I have is The Need for Roots by Simone Weil, which was such a courageously and like a politically courageous and intense book. So the like meaning of the title of the book is that she feels that society has lost its roots, in a sense that people are like detached from ideas of community and family and like staying in touch with a history of a place. A lot of the book isn't just about that though. A lot of it is about like specific reforms and overhauls of things that she thinks need to happen in society, to prevent a decline into fascism, and also to like strengthen workers' relationship with their labor. She isn't a Marxist, but a lot of her like ideas about labor do kind of stem from Marxism. She also like is very interested in distinctions between truth and knowledge, and like like patriotism and like nationalism. This book also like gives a lot of French history, which I don't really know that much about, but yeah, because she's writing at a time, I think she's writing this from London after she's been exiled from France after the like Nazi Germany invaded France and like took it over. So she's writing at a time where she probably feels very threatened as an academic. The way like the acquiring of knowledge and like conflation of truth and ideology and science is just it's like a very dangerous and scary time for an academic, and it's a time like where she, I think, feels very confronted with her own vulnerability. And more than that, she is like such a true activist. Like she everything she writes, she seems so aware of like biases. She calls so a lot of the book is also about biases within science and within academics, which lead to this one-sided and like dangerous spreading of scientific like wrong scientific ideology, which comes from a like very Western historical view and like limited view. So for example, she talks about classical history and people who were like who were genocided and their like art and culture being denied in order to like make the victors, who are the ones writing the history, like appear in a positive light, if that makes sense. She is also quite religious, which is where I kind of took not issue, but maybe like my views kind of diverge from hers, which is fine. So especially towards the end of the book, she talks a lot about religion and sainthood, and how religion's place in society should be. But overall, I really did enjoy this book, and I think it's a pretty good read for anyone who's interested in Simone Weil and her general philosophy. I know she's very famous for like her biography and, you know, the way she lived her life. She was very like interesting and passionate like woman, and that really comes across in her philosophy. So okay, the next book, East of Eden, a very famous book by John Steinbeck, essentially about like rural California and two different families and like the generations and the different like generations of those families, like interpersonal relationships, and the way that family relationships evolve with time. Yeah, the issue I took with this book was the character of Kathy, who is like insanely evil to the point of like caricature almost. So when she's little, she like burns down her family's like house and like kills her parents and steals a ton of money to just go and be a prostitute, which I don't really know, like obviously, you know, literature isn't supposed to be realistic, like it's just that the themes in it and the way it like comes across is supposed to kind of reflect a higher reality. But I just found that the way her character was just like so two-dimensional, especially in comparison to these like complex male figures we get, who are like, you know, dark and twisted, but they're also like good men. Goodness is a very major theme of this novel, like the difference between good and evil, the like intertwining of good and evil, those are all like very much present in this. But then you have a character like Kathy, who's so like simply evil, and that just makes it feel like a little bit lazy, to be honest, and also misogynistic. You know, men are like allowed to visit whorehouses, women, but when women like participate and run them, then generally that's like a sign of like devilish behavior, like that's a sign that something is like seriously wrong with you. But like when men are lonely, like of course they'll go to that. I also kind of took issue with the characterization of a younger Kathy, and like this particular scene where these two young boys like lead her, like she's supposed to have like made two young boys when she's 10. I think the boys were like 16 or something, and like we're supposed to believe that she like led them into this cabin and like forced them to tie her up, and like she's naked and stuff. And I'm like, there's this quote which is like, everyone has gathered with a 10-year-old girl in some leafy bush, or they've at least dreamed to do so. And I'm like, oh okay. And she's also supposed to have seduced her teacher. I don't know, I just really like took issue with Kathy's character. That was like the main thing preventing me from really enjoying this book. There's also something like so like off-putting about Kathy, and he always describes it as like something behind the eyes. And I always find that like misogynistic men, like when they characterize women, they always like to put them into like two categories. So you have like the Madonna whore complex, and besides that, like there's like always something mystical about women. You know, like Simone de Beauvoir talks about this in her famous book The Second Sex, but there's always this character of female mysticism that can be attributed to women. And I think it's important to say that this doesn't go in just like the way which is, you know, saying how like beautiful they are, like otherworldly, like angelic, that this is also like calling them in like a way that calls them devilish in a mystical way. Like they're like, you know, seducers, like sirens. And the way he like describes it as like something behind her eyes that you can't see, but like there's something like not human there, that was very much like mysticism to me, and it just like made me a little bit uncomfortable to read. So the main like preoccupation of this book would be family. So you've got like the narrator who's I think like 2 generations down from the family that he's originally writing about, and it's very much a book about like fathers and their children, mothers and like the relationships they have with them, and siblings and everything like that. The main message that I got from this book is about the complexity of goodness, if that makes sense. To me, the book was just filled with like male characters who just embodied goodness in different ways. Yeah, overall, like I would recommend this. It's just me personally, like I couldn't really get over the way that Kathy was like characterized. Like it felt like women were either like Kathy, like prostitutes, or like or they were like mothers, like good simple mothers, and I don't know, it's just something about that rubbed me the wrong way. So the next book we have is In Search of Lost Time by Proust, which is a very famous book. This is a part of a wider collection of volumes. Like In Search of the Lost Time is the name of the like larger novel, and this is just the first part of it, which is his recollections of childhood. I really enjoyed this book. This is also like a partial reread. I think I read this for the first time when I was 16, but I only got through like half of it. So yeah, I fully read this, and just so like beautifully dramatic and amazing. And Proust just has such a gift for describing things. Like I couldn't even tell you what happened in this book. Like it's just like nothing happens. Like he eats a madeleine with like dipped in tea. You know, like he falls in love, like there's this other guy, and there's like this kind of mini story, like this break in the middle with this other man and his like story of like love and jealousy. And yeah, like it's like the type of novel where you can't say what happens, but like also resonates with you like so deeply, and the language and writing was just like so beautiful and unforgettable. And Proust is just like amazing with metaphors. Like he'll like say something, like, and he would like say, oh, and he felt this feeling, and it's like a very specific feeling which is totally different to whatever's happening right now, and then the feeling, like his description of the feeling will take up like 2 paragraphs, but by the time you finish the end you're like, oh yeah, like I know exactly what he means, and it's just like so good. The translation was amazing as well. This is just the Penguin Modern Classic Edition, and the translation is by Lydia Davis, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. A lot of like translations of Proust are kind of famed for being just like bad in general. Well, I wouldn't know because I haven't even read the original French, obviously I don't speak French, but I think this one was really good. And I read the translator's note. I always read like translator's notes, introductions and that kind of thing, and she said that she really tried to like maintain the kind of complexity of his sentences and the way that he used like grammar in kind of an off-putting way, like a way that you wouldn't usually expect, and I definitely got that from this book. Yeah, I just really recommend it. It's just amazing, and I'll be reading the second one in June, hopefully. But I picked this up in the Lake District actually, from this cute little bookshop in Grasmere, and this is a really beautiful edition of book. I don't know what the publisher of this book is called. Let me have a look right now. Fitzcarraldo Editions Classics. It is such a beautiful book by Edward Said, and I think it's one of the first books that ever came out about like Palestine and its relationship with Zionism from an actual academic. And Edward Said he was a Palestinian academic and activist, and this book really comes across in this book. He fights for a distinct Palestinian identity and a Palestinian struggle which has been like overwritten by so many people from so many different sides, particularly like forces at the heart of the Israeli settlement. So the book gives a very like detailed history of Zionist ideology and the way it has like impacted the land like from the get-go. He also goes into very extensive detail about the specifics of Zionism, like the background behind it, specific like Zionist figures, excerpts from what they've written, and the Orientalist like ideas behind it, and the like undeniable colonial like nature of the Israeli settlement. So yeah, I really recommend this if you're interested in Palestine. I think this book is just more relevant than ever, and a really good like starter book if you're interested in the history of Palestine, and as well as like the introduction of Zionism into that land and how it's affected the people, the culture. The next book I read is Margaret Atwood's Margaret Atwood's book, The Edible Woman. I think this is the first novel she read, and while I did like this book, it does come across that this was her first like full novel. If you've read her later works, I've only read one other book by her, which is The Handmaid's Tale, which I studied at school, and her like very distinct stream of consciousness style, like wordplay, random words mixed in, is definitely still being developed in this book. So you can kind of see it like emerge at some points, but it's definitely not like distinct enough to be called her like Atwood style. I also found the way she writes about women in this book to be a little bit jarring, and in The Handmaid's Tale, like the way that women are written about is obviously supposed to be jarring because you're in this like dystopian future society, but here it's like placed in modern society. So when she describes women in particular ways, when women are like often false, they're disintegrating, they're like not considered like properly part of society, that is a lot more like shocking, and especially combined with her like lack of style, it does seem like kind of pushing against any like feminist agenda she might have had with this book. So I do understand that like the way that she's describing women is maybe supposed to be alienating, like bringing attention to the way that we maybe as women like think about other women in our heads, and the way that society has like molded our perceptions, like made limited perceptions and pathways for us to view other women and our relationships with other women, which I do understand. But the way that this like came across, combined with like the other male characters, just did not make this a feminist novel in the slightest to me. The male characters are very like solid, you know, like even if they're misogynistic, even if they're like you know, condescending, if they're violent, they will. The one thing they are is solid. Like, that's a word that she uses a lot to describe male characters, and it very much appears like in contrast to the females who, you know, they're like full of makeup, like they're like either virgins or like whores, kind of intense. I also found the character of Duncan to be very strange to me. Essentially, this book is about a woman who's has a roommate. Like, it's a pretty normal plot. She just goes to work in an office and she has a roommate, and she has like a fiance, and then the like climax of the book is kind of at the end when they have this like engagement party, and she leaves her fiance at this engagement party for this random guy who she meets at a laundromat, and she like goes out to dinner with him a couple times, and then the epitome of her like self-discovery is when she leaves this guy to like at this party and goes and hangs out with this other guy, and she like, and then the reason that the title of the book is like that is because she bakes her original boyfriend, fiance, this cake, and it's like supposed to be a woman, and she gives it to him. She's like, oh, this should be your girlfriend, like this cake should be your girlfriend, and I'm just gonna leave. And that's like her telling him, I'm leaving you. I don't know, I just had very mixed feelings about this book. Like, overall, I do kind of see like the direction that she was trying to go in, but I can't say that I enjoyed this book that much. The final book I'm going to discuss is Bell Hook's Art on My Mind, which I technically finished in June. I finished this on the 1st of June, but I'm still going to include it in my May books because I started it like before the end of May, and yeah, and I read the majority of it in May. So yeah, I found this such an incredible book, to be honest. Bell Hooks is such an exhilarating and amazing writer, and this book, like the first portion of this book, like the first essays of this book, talk a lot about Black, specifically African American art, and criticism in response to that, and the way that like white superiority has like created this colonial like view that still appropriates Black art, and is the like major force in the art world. So you've still got like a very white art world that like Black artists have to face, and that their art has to like measure up to. It's just an amazing book. I really especially liked her interviews. Like, a lot of the book is made up of interviews with specific artists, and the way she speaks to them and like writes questions, and she's just so good at creating specific dialogue and things about art that are so touching. So a lot of the artists that she talks to deal with art about colonialism, about just existence and belonging. And a major theme that appears in this book is boundary crossing. So a lot of the artists that she talks about, like a lot of the things that appear in her essays, are about a relationship with boundary crossing as an African American woman. So the first artist she discussed, Alison Saar, her work deals a lot with memory, and it's like memory of things that you haven't necessarily experienced yourself, but you would have, say, some ancestral tie to, or you've remembered in a dream, and it's like this kind of this memory representing crossing a boundary between like reality and dream world, like fantasy, and like a lot of the like reception that this artist received was about her own identity, and like white critics bringing identity politics into it and denying her own like connection to folk art, and her like saying that she's like appropriating arts from different cultures, whereas she's saying like, I'm just, you know, like I'm not using this as a way to like claim it as mine, I'm just crossing the boundaries between my experience and like the dream experience. And you know, like identity politics is imposed onto Black artists, and later in the book she also delves into the way that like art made by Black people is also like very much forced into this like resistance narrative, whereas it's like in reality it's very multifaceted. And while, you know, like for some artists resistance might be like a part of that message that they have, like there's also this very complex human like emotional reality behind this art, and a lot of that is being denied in exchange for like this narrative of anger and resistance. so I found that very interesting. There's not just like conversation about art in here. I also really enjoyed her essay on spaces and architecture, which I've never really thought of before, but she talks a lot about how spaces are so like socially significant, and also like her, and also how photography is very significant in a group like creating their own narratives. And then there's also like a little bit about like works of art about blood, and about the way that like black men are also like fetishized and like forced into like tight boxes. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I really recommend this book to anyone. It's just a lovely collection of essays, and Bell Hooks is one of my favorite writers. Those were my May books. It's been such an amazing month of reading, and I hope to read even more and find even more interesting books in July. I hope you guys also picked up some good recommendations from this video, and if you have any recommendations based on what I liked, then you can leave them down below. I'll like look at all of them. So I hope you guys have a great month of June, and I'll see you in my next video.